How's that? Oh, that's a little better.
We can't do nothing right down here.
There. Okay. That's good. That's excellent. Actually, I can hear myself. So I'm always feeling, whenever I come down here, I always feel really welcomed, and I know I don't really deserve it because, it's Daryl who's responsible for, me knowing everybody down here. And that's actually, tonight it's really appropriate because this book is also Daryl's in a lot of ways. I was kind of content to let it sit there and expire, and it was Daryl who really liked it and supported me and wanted to get it out there. So, in every sense that's important, the publication of this is Daryl's doing. And it's also like sort of, I think even as I was writing it, I had somebody like Daryl in mind. He's a big reader, much bigger reader than I am. And I'm not that prolific a writer, so every time I set my mind to writing something, I try to do something completely different. Either a fantasy or a, sort of a first-person screed or nonfiction. And in this case, it was a real novel, like a novel with characters and incidents, things that happen, and even which is a little bit unusual nowadays, an omniscient narrator, so there's no real I in it except floating around. And the part I'm going to read tonight is even more traditional in a way. It's from a section, it's kind of a bit of a story that doesn't really exist anymore. People used to there was a form of novels called prep school novel, and this little piece is very reminiscent of what you used to get in those. But the particular reason I wanted to read it is also because I was here many years ago, and Richard Ford was reading, and he read a very famous story by John Cheever called A Reunion. And that's about a father and a son who meet in Grand Central Station. And I probably had that in the back of my mind when I was writing this section, because it is about a father and a son in Grand Central Station. Beyond that, there's really no similarity, because Cheever's father is a drunk, and my father is insane, and so it's just and the boys are also completely different. But just that fact of sort of having them meet in Grand Central Station, there was something so traditional and preppy about it, and it is a boarding school section, so I'll just sketch what's going on. And Darius is the main character. He's still young, 15, 16. His father is Oliver. Oliver is kind of a disaster of a monster of an old money sort of guy. And they're the two main characters in this, but you should also know that Oliver is in the process of divorcing his wife, and he's allowed her to stay at the family home with her new lover. And not only that, he's started to date someone, in a sense. And this is a weekend in New York that the father and son spend. And the father introduces Darius to this woman that he's seeing. And the one key thing is that when they spend the evening together, Darius sees a work of art that he really falls in love with. And that becomes a rather significant thing in the whole book. I'll start. From the start, Darius was alert to Choate's swank reputation. He had a nose for status. Oliver's curtness on the phone impressed him. Clearly his father outranked the third form dean. Darius is going to be staying on a day or two longer. I'm keeping him down for a bit of family business. I'll send him back up on Wednesday. Darius knew his father only wanted impersonal company for a few more days in New York. Even a child attendant was work. That didn't keep the boy from imagining real family business might be in store. The hours sitting in the dim hotel room until Oliver rose at 10 were made interesting even suspenseful by exercises of imagination. Darius had never spent time alone with his father, and observing Oliver closely really did absorb him. The way his father slept in the ashen light of the curtained hotel room, hands praying under his slumped cheeks, hopeless and suppliant like one of those plaster Pompeians, more model than man, was poignant to Darius and filled him with adult-like pity. Even his father's ugliness was touching when he was asleep. Oliver wasn't the type to snore aggressively or fling out hairy legs or work tanned forearms. It might have been nice to be adopted by that kind of a man, a yeomanly man. And Darius did grieve for that obvious mischance sometimes, wishing he had a completely different life. But the imaginary father and the grief were both a little maudlin and neurotic. When you're ignored, almost anything can take on the semblance of love, even pity. So seeing Oliver's pathetic side was incredibly sweet to Darius. Rather than a gruff, fly-fishing, tough guy of a father, his real one was a Rubik's Cube, a seemingly trivial plastic puzzle with all the infinities of thought and mathematics swirling behind it. Poised as he'd been with the powers it showed, Oliver was stymied by a Broadway ticket broker. Their telephone call devolved into lofty bickering. Going to the theater was canceled when Oliver hung up and remarked, more bewildered than angry, "Well, we won't do that." He proved inept at arranging anything. The museum they wandered to at noon on Monday was closed. At loose ends, they dawdled in Central Park. A twitchy sneer directed at Darius was the only sign that Oliver was aware of a failure. And he soon reminisced contentedly to himself about who used to live in which building. Now and then he glanced blankly at Darius, as if at a limb asleep, not a son. For his part, Darius was too uncertain of his father to make suggestions. Footsore and famished by dinner time, they ended up at the overfamiliar Veau d'Or again. Nothing Darius watched his father do seemed quite right. It ran deeper than worldly incompetence, quirky facial expressions, and the wrong tone of voice. After lunch at a Midtown diner the next day, Oliver stopped Darius from taking a pastel mint from a huge snifter by the cash register. He gave a warning jerk of his head, not a good idea. The cashier was watching him and raised her threaded eyebrows indifferently. When they were on the sidewalk, Oliver explained, some sly customer could easily have dropped something into the bowl, laced it with something. People really do appalling things like that, sadistic at a remove. And if I'm not mistaken, some poisons look like chalk, so there's no way to tell. Evil dangled bizarrely over them in the sunshine while Oliver fogged his glasses with breath and rubbed at them with a shirt tail. Then it was forgotten. No family business came up. The aimless, indelible 2 days slipped away. On Wednesday morning, Oliver took Darius to Grand Central for the train back to Connecticut. He waved at the ceiling and droned with tour guide dullness. These constellations are painted on backward. They'd come an hour too early for the express. At the ticket window, Oliver discovered he had no money to buy Darius a ticket. Darius fished a crumpled 20 from his jeans. A sibilant order from his father made him stuff it back in. Don't flash your money. Something somewhere in the room's monumental dimness snagged Oliver's attention. His head cocked like a dog's. And let's not use credit, he mused. Turning back to the clerk, he said, I'll draw a bit of cash and be back in 2 shakes. Riding the escalator to the cash machine, Oliver imparted the following lesson. Be tremendously careful, Darius, whom you give your credit cards to. I hardly use them. Emergency only. You can be followed. All sorts of information is transferred and stored, and we can't have that. As cheery as teaching this lesson seemed to make him, Oliver was irritable again as soon as he paid for the ticket. I think that's gone way up again. They sat at one of the wooden benches in the waiting room. Oliver crossed his legs several ways. Full of filial discomfort, Darius studied the down-at-heels magnificence of that Vanderbilt Hall. His head dropped back, and he imagined this was his own private room. The quintuple coffered ceiling, the obsessive acanthus leaves, the marble, the over-the-top imperial ornament. It was exactly his style. Dirty, prison-like grills darkened the 5 huge windows. The immense space was almost as dim as a basement. Louche types, none with suitcases or even briefcases, idled in front of the walls of yellowed tan marble, or shuttled in and out of the building under a shallow arch with the legend 42nd Street buses and taxis. Something about the acoustics, the dim swimming pool murmur, half metamorphosed into choir, overwhelmed his puny fantasy of ownership. And Darius remembered, suddenly quite clearly, teenagers and a pool party, and one of them dying, and himself as lonely as a galaxy. This useless loneliness was his true inheritance, he supposed. Over them lapped the wobbly, aquatic clamor of voices. Heat up that slice for a copy of the journal, run to the men's room. Oliver gave every sign of his usual inattention. So Darius was surprised when his father said something that sounded like he'd been reading his mind. I hate that I'm always drowning in feelings. Useless. I hope you're not like that. Maybe it's because travel always feels forlorn. People like us should probably call it forlorning. His nose hitched his glasses when he tilted his head back to squint at the gloomy iron chandeliers. If we happen to be at all alike, that is. The older man heaved a summing up sigh. You do seem almost sad. Did you have a good time? All right, Darius said, cautiously mundane. Was there something you wanted to do that we didn't get to? No. What did you enjoy best? I don't know. Did you like Cassie? Yeah, pretty much. Just that? No, I liked her. Did you fall in love with her? Will we have to fight it out, you and me? Darius ignored the half-hearted provocation. Conversationally, he said, I wanted to talk more with her alone. He was unaccountably tremulous, liable to tears even. He forced it out. You know, about Colin, who used to own our house, her brother, the artist guy. Colin! All bland surprise, Oliver looked down at Darius for the first time. Huh, that's interesting. He was nothing special. Not really. Darius nudged the dirty sleeve of a drinking straw on the marble floor with his sneaker toe. I like that thing of his. Why on earth? But Darius only shrugged. He stretched to push the strip of paper even further out of reach, and his crotch rose from the bench. Do that and you'll get all these men eyeing you, Oliver commented. It wasn't a complaint or a warning. Darius settled back on the honeyed wood and looked around. An alert, pot-bellied man had paused by the passage to the men's room, his eyes on Darius. Another man with an over-careful coif and a slippery gaze had been standing there for quite a while. They looked normal to Darius. As always in those days, the homeless were everywhere as well, reclining on the other benches, dozing on marble floors, human heaps of rags from a differently colored universe. They didn't seem to have bodies or heads, much less eyes. Was Oliver talking about them? Sometimes something glittered in the muddy folds. Were they watching? Oliver's chin did thoughtful calisthenics, rising, crumpling. You know, he said, I could get that battle of what's it artwork. Hardly know what to call it, if it's something you want. Darius opened his mouth in wild orphan boy gratitude, an expression which, though real, felt fake, so he was glad Oliver didn't look at him. He suppressed the expression. Yeah, yes, he was explicit. I could give it to you. Cassie has started to be a good friend. The offer appeared to embarrass him. He hurried on. Do you know what I'm doing right now? Darius shook his head. He said no when Oliver still wouldn't look at him. I'm counting the money in my wallet. What I just got from the cash machine. You really have to be careful about flashing money. He looked around the room to demonstrate alertness. I have a very sensitive thumb. Maybe beating helps. Anyway, you can learn to do it like this with your hand in your pocket without even taking the wallet out or opening it. It's a rough count, but still. Soft, demented laughter bubbled from his chest. It sounded not unlike quiet sobs. What's so funny? Oliver smiled mischievously to himself and squinched his eyes closed. How much, how much, how much? I find I have a lot, he enunciated. Rather a lot. Should I tell you? I think so, Darius smiled. He does too. I think so, Darius smiled. Without being specific, Oliver began, his usual glumness reasserted itself. I have rather a lot of money. He looked at Darius narrowly. Not what I just took out, of course. I don't mean that. We're rich? That would be understating it, Oliver murmured, hardly moving his lips. If I wanted to, I could corner the market on, let's say, teapots. Quite possibly, I could afford to buy every single teapot in the world. How's that for a shocker? Including the gold and silver ones. But hear what I'm going to tell you, boy. This is a big secret. Got to be. Really a total secret. Here. He shifted on the bench, turning toward Darius like the most indulgent teacher. Now, let's be very grown up and serious. You know, naturally, between your mother and me, it's become something of a disaster. That happens, just so you know, because I suppose you're old enough. The two of us, your mother and I, have a sort of deal. According to this deal, she takes care of you financially, everything, school, whatever. In return, I have already given her, a somewhat vast sum, and we're quits. I let her and even that Stan creature of hers camp out in the New Jersey house with me, even though it must make me look like a perfectly sad and indulgent cuckold and a sorry fool. In fact, I gave her the fucking house too. But fool or not, we must never care what other people think about us. So anyway, your mother's entirely responsible for you. She has a house and we're squared. But I'm telling you this secret, tremendous secret, that I, Oliver, have rather more than everyone believes. It's quite clever. He cocked his head at the ceiling. Secrets are like Midas and the reeds, aren't they? Midas in more ways than one. Ha! I'm talking about teapot money. And one day, who knows, he crossed his arms tightly. A gloomy expression tried to reassert itself. Darius didn't entirely understand what his father was saying. Is teapot money billions? Oliver put a finger to his lip. Zillions. But hush about it. If this was family business, and it didn't sound dramatically unlike Oliver's usual raving. Darius wasn't even sure he grasped the essential point, though he had. You mean you have a lot more money than you told Mom? Oliver nodded. Is that allowed? I'm letting them live together in my own house with me, my house. But still, Oliver savored the argument. Seems to me they have nothing to complain of. But now that you told me, what's to keep me from telling them? Her, I mean. Even if you did, they have no argument. It's all locked up in lawyer language, the hardest substance known to man. Oliver winked. He looked drowsy with pleasure. His eyes fell closed. He was silent for a long time before adding crisply, but you won't. Think about it, and you'll realize why. You won't say anything. Darius did think. The first reason that came to him was sentimental. He thought his father was saying in a harsh way, I know how much, in spite of yourself, you love me, and you would never do anything that went against my wishes. You've promised to keep my secret. This reason had the ring of truth, but Oliver meant nothing of the kind. For Oliver, conceiving himself the object of anyone's love was as unlikely a mental experience as he could possibly have. He was making a threat, or since the whole delicious plot he concocted, while real, he was indeed cheating his wife in divorce, had a slight disjunct from reality, like a contact lens knocked afloat on an eye. It was as if he were merely playing when he made the awful threat of disinheritance. Perhaps he was so rich, whatever he played at shaded into truth. Darius would keep silent about Oliver's hidden riches, because only if he did would a fantastic windfall eventually come to him. In fact, given the familiar air of madman's fantasy, the entire secret was soon discounted in Darius's mind. He was much more excited about the artwork, the battle of desires and bitternesses. Oliver thought he'd been brutally clear about the threat of disinheritance, so much so that he felt in his throat the faint pressure of a sob of a fossil emotion. He let his palms fall to his thighs and announced, "Enough of all this dirty talk about you-know-what. It's good, though." His smile was a little ghastly. His long-fingered hand rose, but at the last moment, he couldn't bring himself to ruffle Darius's hair. His hand plucked strangely at the faded, curling collar of the boy's polo shirt. "Good to chat away and confide. Whatever. I'll be off. Your train's in 20 minutes. And I'm happy if anybody's curious about anything, happy to talk more about it. Lisa.
David, could you talk a little bit about your influences and the books that now and at any time have really influenced you, but especially for writing this one? I mean, you mentioned the prep thing,
Right.
Cheever and Richard Ford, I see that, but to me, it reminded me so much of certain Brit writers that, you know,
Yeah.
from another era. I wonder who.
Well, just the kind of, it was a 19th century novel that I was kind of looking at because, no one really, excuse me, no one really, has an omniscient narrator anymore. It's always, me, I did this, like people don't even feel comfortable writing unless it's in the first person. And so it was a deliberately strange and artificial thing for me to do, to try to invent characters in the first place, invent incidents, make the characters as kind of odd and 19th century as I possibly could, and pull it all together with an omniscient narrator. And then, and then I was thinking, the other thing, that was sort of my model, was this, vague 19th century idea. But then I turned it into, obviously a 20th century novel, so there's lots of sex and stuff like that in it. But the only thing beyond that I was really fixated on is something that I had never thought before when writing a book, and that was to be appealing, to actually have somebody enjoy it in some way, in some small way. And that was probably Daryl's influence. So I just wanted to make it, flow and have like at least minimal suspense as you're going through it.
Name some names, though, or some titles that really mean something to you and affect your writing.
Yeah. Well, for this one, it's sort of different for each one, because...
This one, then.
For this one, yeah. Well, the angled repose, I do love, sort of, English novels today. Most of them do have a first person in them, but I love the, excuse me. But in a way also, now I've forgotten what I was. Yeah, all this coughing.
Sorry,
It's driving me crazy. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's really okay. But I'm thinking like sort of the books you admire, and I don't really have control over how I write. So even if I admire the books, and there are lots that I admire, like Andrew Holleran is a writer that I, adore. Even if I admire them, I don't know if, even when I think I'm imitating them very, very closely, or Edmund White, for instance, those writers don't do anything like I end up doing. And even if I try to write like them, it comes out in this very odd, personal way. So, you know, the only thing I successfully imitated, I thought, at least to some point, is that overall structure. But as far as imitating people, I tried to imitate Ed White like for years and years and years. And I can't do it, you know, it's just a totally different sort of thing. But, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah.